Hello, 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 and welcome back. This is BSB Preview, our 6 p.m. edition. I am Sandy Lowe, and I feel like I'm presenting the news. I don't know why. Okay, I am Bold Stroke Senior Editor. You guys all know me. I have an amazing panel of authors with me tonight. We have Georgia Beers, Sam Ledel, Sander Santiago, and Jane Kolven. And they are all reading from their April releases, which will be out in just a couple days, but you can pre-order them tonight before 7:30 Eastern Time, and you get 15% off. If you weren't here for our last panel, I will put that link for you in the chat roll. Alrighty, I need a minute for our Facebook Live. So my question for our panelists is highly debated and contentious. Are you a plotter or a pantster? And what kind of thought did you put into this book? And I may or may not be asking that as Bold Stroke Senior Editor. Who knows? Take it away, Georgia.
I like to refer to myself as a plantster because I used to plot like everything. I used to plot like in great detail with an outline and everything. And then I kind of got away from that a little bit. And I think that happened as I got to know myself as a writer and what works for me. What happens with me is if I plot too much, if I get too involved in outlining and planning, then I just get really antsy and I just want to write. But if I don't plan a little bit, then I tend to write myself into a corner. So I've learned that I have to do like the bare bones of some kind of an outline. I have to know the beginning, the middle, and the end. But then I can connect the dots myself as I go along. So I fall in the middle. So I say plantster, plant, yes, that. Sam, what about you?
I tend to fall kind of in that same lane of a little bit of both. With this one I'm going to be reading from in particular, since it was the final book of a trilogy, I had a lot of the big points that I wanted to hit planned. So I knew where I wanted to get eventually, and everything in between was just kind of, we'll see what happens as we get there sort of thing. So yeah, that was me. How about you, Sander?
I plan to make a plan, and then I sit down and forget the plan and then write some stuff. I feel like I am very character driven. Like sometimes I'll have a setting and I'll be like, what do people do here? And then I'll have like an idea of an event, and it's like, what's people's reactions? But more often than not, the characters go and I follow, and I'm like, okay, thanks for this journey. So I try to plan, and I get very nothing happens. Jane.
I am the opposite of you. I meticulously plan everything.
I knew there would be one of us.
I have spreadsheets, I have charts, but I have learned though that you can't just stick to that outline because your writing becomes really sort of rigid and I think mechanical. And so you have to like listen to the characters because sometimes they want to go in a different direction. So I'm kind of with Georgia. It's like a mix of both. But I do have like lots of really cool Excel spreadsheets if anyone ever wants one.
I think if you write a series, I don't know, I'm working on a series right now, and I made myself a little Bible so that anything that's important, any like new character with a name, I jot that down because you know it's going to come up later. And the last thing I want to do is have to scroll and figure out where it was. So the Bible's a good thing. One of you said you were writing a trilogy. So yeah. Do you have one of those?
I should have done that. I probably shouldn't be admitting this with Sandy here, but I should have planned a whole lot more with my trilogy than I might have, but it worked out.
Oh, the things you learn. All right, we are going to start our readings. We are going to start with Jane Kolven, who has possibly the best title for a book that I've ever heard. I'm going to let her introduce it, but that's high praise because we have a lot of books, and I do love this title. If everyone else can stop your video and mute yourselves so Jane has the floor, that would be great.
Well, thank you for that, Sandy. Actually, I'm really happy because a couple of weeks ago, Buckingham Palace issued a formal statement that said the Queen has a cold. So my book title is now Actual Royal Legacy. So my book is called The Queen Has a Cold, and it's a royal romance between Sam, an American grad student who uses she, her pronouns, and Remy, who is intersex and non-binary and uses they, them pronouns. Remy is the heir to the throne of a fictional country called Montemont. And they met in Boston, where they're both attending grad school. But very quickly into the semester, the queen became sick. She got a cold. I don't think I'm spoiling anything if I tell you it was a cold. And Remy had to rush home to perform an important ceremony for her. And they convinced Sam to come with them. So in this scene, they're on the plane on the way. They'll land in Geneva shortly. They're just waking up after an overnight flight. Sam, are you awake? She made some incoherent mumbling noises and a clumsy hand tried to push her hair off her face. Sam, what did you say? I couldn't hear you. She blinked to life. What time is it? In Boston or Montemont? Are you trying to wake me up? No, I thought you were already awake. Well, I am now. She sat up and flipped her hair over her shoulder. Did we finish the movie? You fell asleep before it ended. What happened? The rich man said he didn't care if Jack Lemmon was really a man. Sam grinned. Really? That's kind of daring for back then. You like that? Well, yes, of course. Did you just wake me up to find out how I felt about the movie or my attitudes toward gender? I woke you up because I was hungry. Ah, so you admit you woke me up on purpose. Sam fumbled around with the chair to try to get it to sit up, but when she couldn't figure out how, she slithered out of it onto her feet. I guess I should get dressed then. If they made it to the palace in time, she might be able to shower and do her hair, or one of the palace chambermaids could style it for her. That depended on how quickly they cleared customs in Geneva and whether there was a lot of morning traffic. While Sam was in the bathroom, the flight attendant set up the table for breakfast. Coffee, Your Highness? She hadn't referred to Remy by their title until this moment. It was a startling reminder that Remy was about to lose their individuality, to become only Your Highness, to go from feeling like themselves, like they had started to in Boston, to feeling wrong. People born as commoners probably thought being royal was glamorous and full of perks. How little they understood about the sacrifices royals were often asked to make for the greater good of their nation. At least elected officials were allowed to retire. For royalty, the job was never over. By the time Sam emerged from the bathroom, looking gorgeous and impossibly fresh, Remy had made a mental list of things she'd need to know before they reached the palace. They settled on the couch with breakfast while Remy tried to prepare her. Madame Pouvoir is in charge of the household, and even though you'll be there as my guest, you should do anything she tells you to. She will prevent any trouble. What kind of trouble do you anticipate me getting into? None, but there are aspects of palace culture you don't know. Madame gives everyone advice. She's an encyclopedia of royal protocol. In fact, I think the Queen added protocol officer to her official job description. You sound fond of her, Sam observed. I am. She raised me. She's a terrifying person, but she's efficient at her job, and in her best moments, she was a tender nanny. Remy, she misgendered you your entire life. She forced you into an identity that wasn't yours. That's abuse. Remy harbored some long-standing resentment toward their mother and the world, and occasionally it angered them that Pouvoir hadn't been more willing to speak up on their behalf. But abuse? Sam hadn't been there and didn't know enough about their family to say such a thing. I appreciate the way you defend me, but that doesn't give you the right to talk about my family however you want. I decide who I want in my life and how I want them there. Madame Pouvoir may be authoritarian, but she did the best she could to make sure I had a good childhood while trying to help my parents protect the monarchy. Please, not an unkind word. Sorry. Sam's voice was soft and low. I wish you'd had a better childhood, and I'm angry on your behalf. But you're right, it's not my place. You're the only one who can decide who is at fault and who you choose to forgive. Sam was sincere in her apology, they could tell, and they didn't want her to feel badly. They knew she was only concerned for them. What she didn't understand was that Madame Pouvoir, in her own way, was also. Everything she had done, even the things that now seemed wrong, had been out of concern for Remy and desire to protect them. Although Remy's childhood hadn't been easy, they didn't fault Pouvoir for it. They put a hand on Sam's cheek to show there was no real argument. She leaned into their touch, putting her own hand atop Remy's. They gazed into each other's eyes, and for one perfect moment, Remy imagined what life would be like with her. How simple it would be, despite all the political, economic, and social complexities that stood between them. To kiss Sam's soft lips, to hold her hand, to feel her body against theirs. Remy was becoming infatuated with her. They squeezed, their eyes closed. The reality was that in a few hours, they would stand in front of a huge gathering of people to secure the monarchy. No matter what happened now on the plane, no matter how they organized their lives back in Boston, for the next few days, Sam couldn't be anything other than a friend. It wasn't done. Remy had to marry royalty. And prior to plans for marriage, it was inappropriate to make public appearances with a casual lover. What else before we arrive? Sam's lips parted slightly, an invitation for Remy. There's a lot I want to do before we arrive. Remy's voice was breathy, the heat rising in their body. They both leaned forward, and Remy closed their eyes as their lips gently pressed to Sam's. Thank you.
I don't know. I think they're going to fall in love.
No, come on, Sandy.
I don't know. I'm gunning for him.
Always spoiling the romance, you.
Right there in the metadata.
That was wonderful.
Great reading, Jane. So one quick question for you. I noticed that you use they pronouns and that you use the term misgendered. So for you as an author, what is it about exploring gender that appeals to you and the way that you work it into your novels?
I mean, I have like a 7-hour lecture answer, but I guess like the quick and dirty is like, I often write about the queer community that I live in. And although I am always presumed straight and I have to convince people that I'm not, the people that surround me in my life identify with a range of sexualities and a range of genders. And I think that I should use my privilege to try to advocate for them as best as I can, and telling stories where they get to thrive and fall in love and the community accepts them. So I'll spoil that part of the book too. It's a romance, of course, there's happy ending, right? That to me is a gift that I can give to the community.
I love that. Great answer. All right, I totally forgot who was going to go next, but I think it's Sander. Okay, awesome. Sander's going to read from his debut novel, so please give him lots of encouragement. We're super excited. His debut novel, the stuff
That's for the wrong reasons.
Oh my gosh, I had all the words, but not in the right order. That's the wrong reasons. All right, if everyone else can please stop their video and mute themselves, give Sander the floor.
So this is the book, what it looks like. It's called Best for the Wrong Reasons. And the section I'm going to be reading from sort of happens after the two main characters, Finn and Orion, sort of reunite. They were friends in high school, and they knew each other intimately in college. But they haven't been able to figure out this thing called a relationship. So Orion's been through a tragedy. He lost his mom, and shortly after the funeral, he got super wasted, and Finn was there to take care of him. So this is picking up at the morning after. Somewhere a latch clicked gently. To me, it was an explosion. I nearly jumped out of my skin and was instantly transported to a world of pain. My head felt like it was going to burst open. My muscles collapsed under my weight, and every single part of me felt the loss of my mother. Tears burned in my eyes at the sudden sensation. God, just take me now. I sat up hoping it would settle the room. It didn't. It just sent the floor up over the ceiling, and I knew I was going to vomit. I stood and started for the bathroom. Even though I wasn't completely sure where I was, my body seemed to know the way. I didn't even knock. Orion, I heard Finn screech. Wait, Finn? Like actual Finn? From behind the shower curtain as I plowed into the bathroom, the door slamming against the tub with a high cracking pop. I stumbled against the tub, nearly pulling the shower curtain down. I could sense Finn jump back, heard him hit his elbow on something metal inside the shower. Shit, Finn, I'm sorry, And then I was face first in Finn's toilet, barfing. It gave me time to remember what a gigantic asshole I was. I was half dressed, barfing in the bathroom of a guy I royally ghosted after a night of binge drinking over the death of my mother. Orion, you are just the bee's knees. Oh, are you okay? Finn called from inside the shower. I wasn't, but I couldn't tell him that. I was done barfing, though. When I was sure no more would come, I slumped against the toilet and the floor, the cool tile and porcelain, going a long way to ease my suffering. I used some of the toilet paper to wipe my mouth and then tossed it into the bowl. The room reeked of whatever dude shampoo Finn was using and my own barf. Nah, yeah, maybe, I said, running my hands over my sweating face. The smell that fogged my general area threatened to send me back to the toilet, so I pulled the handle. Finn screamed. There was a heartbeat, and then a flash of curtain and skin as Finn dove out of the shower. I saw everything, before he was able to get a towel around himself. Then he turned on me, his breath heavy, his face angry. I scrambled to my feet, not understanding the sudden panic. What happened? I cried. Really? You don't remember? He grumbled, wiping water from his face. I thought it out, staring at Finn. A series of flashes went off, and I remembered. In the old Nest house, if you turned on the faucet anywhere, flushed a toilet, or even if the sprinklers came on at the neighbor's house, the shower water would go suddenly scalding hot and then painfully cold. Finn was funny, his face scrunched in concentrated rage. The rest of him, however, was an unintimidating bright pink. Being the sympathetic guy I was, I slumped over laughing. Damn it, Orion, Finn hissed, raking wet red hair from his face. He stood dripping and glaring, but I could only see the slightest hint of amusement behind his pursed lips. I'm sorry, Finn, I giggled, leaning against the wall to steady myself. The Finn from last night on the bridge seemed like the painting of a person I had known. Finn's beard was a dark red, intentionally trimmed and shaped into a professional look. The hair on his head, a lighter red, was cut into the latest trend I'd seen on billboards. Even his accent had softened, the drawl barely there at the ends of words. Despite all that, the freckles, the pale, almost translucent skin, and the shadowy, hazel eyes were the same. I had seen Finn look many ways, but time, age, and distance had changed what I remembered. It's not like I couldn't lurk on the guy's social media when I wanted a good dose of, look at what you fucked up. So I had seen pictures of Finn over the years. The man sitting with me on the bridge that night had seemed like yet another picture of a person I had known. I saw the real Finn standing in the bathroom. The effect was jarring, and I stared because I was a thirsty creep. I let the seconds stretch, taking in the water glistening off his hard, subtle abdominal muscles. I felt paralyzed by the lazy splatter of freckles on creamy shoulders and lean arms, stretching as Finn tensed under my gaze. The tattoo was new, less than 2 years old. My brain even took a mental snapshot of Finn's big hand clenching the towel to cover his hips. Oh man, this is gonna haunt you. I was just lucky that I was too hungover to spring wood. A song rambled. It's a high price to pay for a memory, but I will take what I can get. It's another day in our history. Don't make me end it yet. Finn seemed unamused, his skin going from pink to pinker. He snapped to catch my attention and pointed for the door. I laughed and moved to leave. As I crossed, I caught a peripheral glimpse of myself in a mirror. I was half dressed, hair falling in chaotic patches over my face. Overall, I looked like a guy who would throw up in your bathroom. I would have been embarrassed, but I was too distracted. Finn cleared his throat. Yep, I'm going back to sleep, I hummed, that too comfortable feeling creeping up. I noticed some toothpaste on the sink, and without thinking too much about it, I took it up and squirted some in my mouth. The intense mint made my eyes water, but I swished it around anyway. You're feral, Finn grumbled, but I could tell he was trying to hold back a laugh. I responded by swallowing. Oh my God, Finn sighed. He looked me over, not in a sexy way, but in a medical way. I was being examined. I liked Finn's eyes on me anyway. I wanted to say something, but I had nothing, many nothings, so I continued to leave. Wait, Finn stopped me, a hand on my shoulder. I waited as he opened a cabinet over the sink and retrieved an aspirin bottle. He held it out to me like he was offering me a dirty tissue. I took the whole bottle, shaking it. I offered Finn a salute and meandered back to his room. I chugged the glass of water on Finn's nightstand, sending pills down with it. Then I flopped on the bed, intending to slide to the floor again.
Awesome. Well, I don't know about anyone else on the panel, but holy damn, that's your debut novel?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, I love your voice. That was amazing. Thank you so much. I love the shower scene gone wrong. Okay, so this book is written in first person, yes?
Yes.
Okay, so why did you choose first person?
Well, originally, actually, the first draft I submitted to distant publishers was in third person. And I got some really great feedback from an editor who turned me down, thankfully, because I wouldn't be with Bold Strokes otherwise. Oh. And they recommended first person. And looking back at it now, I recognize that third person, A, gives me too much power. As an omnipresent being, I will abuse that right. And it also allows me the opportunity to explore some of the nuance of individuals' thoughts more and their voices. From the section I read, you can tell that Orion has no problem swearing. Finn, the voice, eventually it switched to Finn's perspective, and he's way more reserved in some instances. He also doesn't have music constantly playing in his brain like Orion does. So it gives me the opportunity to distinguish them more. And I feel like I won't ever go back to writing in third person, just because I'm sort of a sucker for some of that like inter monologue and the way they distinguish themselves. So.
Okay, well, don't tell anyone this, okay? Because we're not being recorded and this isn't going to end up on the internet. I don't think you should write in anything but first person ever again, because you totally nailed that. That was amazing.
Thank you.
First reading for your debut novel. None of us have inferiority complexes. That's not a thing.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
All righty. Next up, we have Sam Ledel, who is reading from the final book, I'm pretty sure, in her new trilogy. And before I get the title wrong, I am going to let her introduce it. If everyone else can please mute and stop video.
All right, thank you, Sandy. Hi, everybody. I'm Sam Ledel. I have 4 books published with Bold Strokes Books, 3 of which have to do with my reading today. As Sandy said, I am reading from the final book of the Odium trilogy. I'm going to be reading from The Princess and the Odium. This is a fantasy adventure series, and we met the main characters, Jastin Cypher and Princess Aurelia, in book 1, Daughter of No One. And the events of that book catapult them into each other's lives, and they end up going on this epic journey together. And they travel across their magical realm in search of a mysterious cure for Jastin's sister, which is the premise for book 2, Broken Rain. There has been a romance building between the two of them, between Jastin and Princess Aurelia, over the course of the series. And in book 2, Jastin was harboring a secret. And once that secret got out, it left their romantic relationship in a very dubious place. Also in book 2, all mayhem broke loose, and the two of them were separated from one another. So book 3 sees them finding their way back to each other while dealing with the mayhem. And the passage I'm going to be reading today is from Aurelia's perspective. She and her parents, the king and queen, are on the run due to the mayhem. And Aurelia has just been reunited with Jastin. And Jastin has reluctantly agreed to help the royal family with their situation. So here we go. Aurelia wanted to leap for joy. She wanted to shout into the tops of the tattered vendor roofs, dance across the lush grass, and sing among the trees as Justin led them into the wood. Justin was alive. Aurelia, a few steps behind, took a moment to scan her figure. The worn tunic looked dirty, much like her own, but her old boots had a shine to them. She desperately yearned to pull Justin aside, talk to her, tell her that she understood why she did what she had done. She longed to take Justin's hand, to talk to her about everything, but this was not the time. She threw a glance over her shoulder, impressed to find her parents keeping pace as they splashed across a babbling brook. Her mother's riding clothes needed a wash, and Aurelia knew her mother was dying for a hot bath. Her father looked almost gleeful, a small smile hidden beneath his grizzly beard as they each leapt over a large fallen log. "Where are we going?" Aurelia asked, more for her parents' sake than her own. She trusted Justin and perhaps naively hoped her parents might too. She wished that they could see Justin as the wonderful person she was and hoped they would change their minds about odiums. Alas, since following Justin's lead, her mother had kept her distance, and such a change of heart didn't seem promising. Justin replied, "I'm taking you to Egypt's meadow." "Who is Egypt?" her father called, his voice intrigued. "Someone from the village?" When Justin looked back, Aurelia caught the grin. "She's a friend of mine." Her father gave a curious pout. Her mother did not look amused. Aurelia tried to give them a reassuring smile, but even she felt anxious. After navigating through several layers of apple trees, they cleared the final line of tall ash trunks to find themselves in a lovely open meadow, surrounded by hawthorn trees and scattered with bilberry flowers. Aurelia's mother was at her side, speaking under her breath. "Darling, what is she getting us into?" "Mother, Egypt is a friend." At her mother's wrinkled forehead, she added, "This is a safe place. Trust me." Aurelia winced at her mother's scoff and threw an apologetic look to Justin, but she was already halfway across the open space, the ankle-high grass parting with each purposeful step she took. She motioned for her parents to follow, but they lingered instead, scrutinizing this new place. Her father lifted his chin to sniff the air. Aurelia, too, could smell the salt on the breeze and realized they were near the coast. "Why does the air feel peculiar?" her father asked, his deep voice carrying on a light breeze. "Cloaking spell," Justin called over her shoulder. Aurelia's mother crossed her arms, still not moving. "Your friend doesn't trust many if she feels the need to cloak her home from the rest of the world." Justin, who had crouched to rummage through a pile of old pots, stood. Aurelia swallowed as her mother's gaze bored into Justin's, who stepped around the fire pit as she said, "I could say the same about you, Your Majesty." "Me?" Her mother's lips raised in a smile. It was the smile she used when the conversation in the dining hall broached a topic she didn't care for. Justin pointed between the three of them. "You don't cloak your home like Egypt does. The royal family hides behind giant towers of impenetrable stone, crawling with layers of guards." She walked over as she spoke, never breaking eye contact with Aurelia's mother. "What are you afraid of?" Aurelia squeaked, meeting her father's frantic gaze with her own. Her mother seemed unperturbed. "We hide from nothing. Our home is one of fortitude." She gestured around the meadow. "What drives your friend to such an isolated part of this realm?" Justin smiled. "You do." Aurelia felt as if the strings of a harp were tightening inside her chest as she blinked between Justin and her mother. "Well," Aurelia said, "shall we start a fire? I feel the air growing colder, don't you all?" When her mother and Justin continued to stare one another down, Aurelia said, "Justin, care to help me?" To her relief, Justin turned to assist her, but not before saying, "And you're wrong, Your Majesty. This place isn't one of isolation. It's freedom." Thank you.
Awesome.
I love that. So, Sam, you decided to make things real easy for yourself, and you wrote a trilogy that has a plot that extends across all three books that is also fantasy. What was that like for you after having written kind of a standalone novel? What was it like to write this series?
Well, it was a lot of fun, but it was a lot of work. And I definitely had to plan more than I'd ever planned any writing I'd ever done. in terms of making sure I followed through with the important plot points throughout the series, as well as the romance between Justin and Aurelia, making sure I hit those beats when I wanted to, because there's quite a bit going on in this series. And so it was a really exciting challenge, I would say, overall for me.
Awesome. Love it. All right. Last up, we have the incomparable Georgia Beers.
I don't know about that, but okay.
Who is reading from book 287. Just about that. What do you track what number it is, Georgia?
This one is 28.
28. Wow. Do you know what year your first book came out?
2000.
Wow. All right. That's a lot in 20 years. Awesome.
It is. It is. I sped up the last few years.
All right. Please take it away whenever you're ready. Introduce your book and reading whenever you like.
Okay. I'm going to read to you guys from my book that's coming out next month called The Secret Poet. You don't need a ton of background because I'm going to read to you from fairly early in the book, but our main character is Morgan Thompson. She's the administrative assistant at a very small doctor's office. She works for her brother, Perry, who is the doctor. And as the book goes on, they meet their new pharmaceutical rep, who they both develop feelings for, but Perry asks Morgan to help him woo her. Sort of, this is my take on the Cyrano de Bergerac trope. So while Morgan is helping him, she starts to realize that she has feelings herself for this woman. So I'm just going to read to you from early on when we first meet Zoe, the pharmaceutical rep. And if I put these glasses on, I can actually see what I'm reading. It's never not busy at my job. There's always something to do. Filing, emails, invoicing, paying invoices. And if by some miracle of miracles, all that stuff is done, there's the waiting room. Straighten the magazines, pick up the toys, put them in the toy box in the corner, make sure nobody left coats, gloves, hats, purses in the closet area. My point being, there's always something to do. However, when you've worked there for 9 years, you have seniority and the boss is your big brother, you kind of have freedom to let some of that stuff slide if you need a break, mentally or otherwise. And on that Thursday, I just needed to lose myself in a book for 20 minutes. I knew something was going to happen on that Thursday. I can't tell you why. I have no idea. I just remember that I woke up with an odd feeling. Not a bad feeling. And I don't want to say that things felt off because that kind of implies that I was scared or worried, and I wasn't. But something was definitely different. By the time I decided I needed a moment to forget myself in the latest Kristen Higgins, that feeling had been forgotten and I was my normal self again. Morgs, make sure the pharmacy on Dickens gets the revised prescription for Mrs. Curtis. I took a moment to finish the page I was on, something I always did when Perry came at me with no greeting and just demanded. Again, he's my brother. I can be insubordinate and get away with it. Sometimes. I carefully placed the bookmark and closed the book, and then I looked up at him. I'm sorry, what did you need? I smirked because I'd absolutely hurt him, and he knew it. I could tell by the way he cocked his head and pursed his lips. I set my book down just as the front door opened, and he looked in that direction. It's funny when I look back on that memory now, because I didn't glance at the door. My gaze was on my brother, and he was almost comical. His eyes widened and his lips parted, and I was kind of surprised to see some pink blossoms on his cheek. Perry was not a blusher at all. My big brother was most often the epitome of calm, cool, and collected. When you sometimes had to deliver bad medical news to people, having a poker face was very important. But that day, zero. He had zero poker face, zero coolness, zero chill. When I looked towards the door, I saw why. Stunning. I had read that word as a descriptor countless times, but I don't think I've ever actually seen a woman in person until then or since who elicited that word from me on the first second I laid eyes on her. This one was brunette, and her hair was the first thing that caught my eye. Dark waves of it, a lot of dark waves of it. My fingers instantly itched to twirl it, to dig into it. She was a little taller than average and carried herself with an air of authority, dressed in a smartly cut pantsuit that was a deep blue with a lighter blue top underneath the jacket. She shut the door behind her, turned to us, and smiled widely, and oh my God, the cheekbones. The gorgeous do a double take at that color blue eyes. I swallowed some foreign lump in my throat as she crossed the few steps to my counter and stuck her hand out to me. Hi, I'm Zoe Blake. And right then, on that day, in that moment, in that very second that I slipped my hand into hers, I somehow knew that life would never be the same. I didn't know how or why or when, but I knew something was going to change forever. And you must be Dr. Thompson, Zoe Blake said as she shifted those eyes from me to Perry, removed her hand from mine and held it out to him. Only then did I notice that she held a plate in her other hand. Perry did that rapid blink thing that you do when you realize you've been staring for too long, but quickly pulled himself back into doctor mode, and he reached over the counter and shook her hand through the little window. I am. It's nice to meet you, Zoe. It turned out Zoe Blake was our new pharmaceutical rep with Kelverson, a company we dealt with regularly. Zoe explained how she was new to town, but not to Kelverson. So I just wanted to pop in and say hi, show my face, and leave these. She handed me the plate, which was piled with about a dozen cookies, oatmeal raisin if I guessed correctly. I know it's a little unconventional to bring something homemade, but like I said, I'm new to town and I've been a little nervous, and when I'm nervous, I make cookies. She shifted one shoulder in what looked to be a slightly self-conscious half shrug and grinned sort of sheepishly, then added quickly, no nuts in those, FYI. Her smile, God, what was it about her smile? I was able to study her as she spoke with Perry, and there was something there, something underlying. Was it a sadness? And I had a sudden, almost irresistible urge to start asking her questions, to get to know her better, like right then. I bit down on my bottom lip. My thoughts came to a screeching halt when I realized that both Zoe and Perry were looking at me, and it was like I'd been underwater, like when all the sound is muffled and then you break the surface and the sound becomes really clear. Perry's eyes widened at me and he used them to gesture behind me. The phone was ringing. Oops. I hit the button and I spoke into my headset, beyond disappointed that I couldn't stare at Zoe Blake anymore. Probably a good thing. By the time I finished the call, the whole time silently cursing Mrs. Jenkins for needing to set up an appointment at that very moment, the plate of cookies was on the counter to my left and Zoe was heading out the front door. She looked back to pull it shut behind her, glanced up at me and shot me that smile. It liquefied my insides instantly. And then she was gone. Look, I need you to understand that I'm not a person who objectifies women, and I realize that's what it sounds like I was doing because all I've talked about is what Zoe looked like. But that's all I knew of her at that moment, her physical appearance. And yeah, it was head turning. It affected me. But know this, Zoe Blake was so far out of my league, we were playing different sports. A woman like her, should she happen to play on my team, which I was sure she did not, would never look twice at somebody like me. I knew it, and I was okay with it. It was my life, and I was used to it. But I could look. There was no harm in that, was there? And my God, she made the best cookies I'd ever had in my life. Thank you.
Oh, I want to meet a girl who makes cookies when she's nervous.
Right?
That's going on my list of, must-have traits. All right, so I promise not every question I ask is going to be about first person, but Georgia, you have written a bunch of books in third person and a few in first person too. So what was it about this book that made you decide that first was the right choice?
There was a couple things. First of all, I wanted you to really, really know Morgan. I wanted you to be in her head. I wanted you to understand what she was thinking. And as Sandra said earlier, it's you can just do that better when you're in first person. You can be right in there. It's like when you're in third person, you're in the person's head. And then when you're in first person, it's like there's another door and you go in farther. And now you're like in like the good stuff. So I wanted that. And second of all, I didn't want you to be able, you as the reader, to know where Zoe was at through the whole book. If you know where she's at, then it kind of spoils the story. So I wanted Zoe to be as big a mystery to the reader as she is to Morgan. And so writing in first person seemed to be the way to take care of that.
I like that. Cool. Alrighty, if any of our participants have a question for our panelists, please put it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and I will pick them up from there. I do have one to start us off for the next 10 minutes or so. And that is, if you could pick one of your secondary characters to have their own novel, who would it be and why? Jane, you're giving me eye contact. I'm going to go with you first.
Can I think of giving you eye contact on Zoom. The reading that I did today talked a lot about this character, Madame Pouvoir, who is, in French, pouvoir means power. And she's the one who essentially runs the monarchy. She's the queen's secretary. And I love her. I think she's a horrible, scary, amazing woman. And I think there's a lot behind the scenes that we don't get to unpack because this book is from other people's point of view. Although there are a couple of scenes from her point of view. And I think probably she's a screaming Les, and we need to know that. So I think she would be fun for a spin-off book.
All right. I love that. Sam, how about you? Which secondary character should have their own book?
Okay, I'm going to give 2 answers. So from this trilogy, I would be really entertained to follow Egypt, the hedge witch, around. She's this like ancient witch who doesn't really care about anything. And I think her day would just be hilarious, just whatever she would be doing. So I would like to follow her around for a time. And then for my first novel, Rocks and Stars, I would love to do a book from the love interest perspective, from Joey's perspective, from that book, because that book is in first person, so you don't get to know as much about her. So that would be my other choice.
Awesome. All right, Sander, how about you? Which secondary character should have their own book?
My characters have, or my books have a lot of characters, because I believe everybody needs like best friends and like a bartender you talk to with all of your problems. And so there are actual other books, because I'm not a plotter. They just exist in a nebulous void in my brain for other side characters. Finn's got a best friend who I plan to follow around in another story. His name is Alexander. And then, but like there's one character who has like I think the romance of everyone's dreams in terms of like true love foundation, and that's Finn's mom, like his parents. And like I don't read go figure a whole lot of like heterosexual relationships, but I would definitely pick up their book because they're beautiful people and I love them both. So
I love it when you fall for your secondary characters. George, how about you? Which secondary character should have their own book?
That's a hard one. I mean, I did the novella, the Christmas novella, with a secondary character from 16 Steps to Forever. And that was fun because I really liked that character. That was Sasha Wolf. What's interesting is there's a pizzeria in The Secret Poet called Pizzeria Cannavale, and it's owned by Marissa Cannavale. And I was going to spin her off into her own story, and I haven't gotten a chance to do that. And now she shows up in the series that I'm writing, but just like my characters go to the pizzeria and she's there and she's like, hey, how you doing? And I would like to figure out something to do with her, and I haven't been able to come up with it yet, but give me some time.
I mean, all you need is pizza.
Right?
Like, I've
done wine, I've done cookies, why can't I do pizza?
Right, totally.
I can do pizza.
All right.
Never.
We do have a question from one of our participants for Sander. From Lynn Carlson. She has read that you write poetry as well as prose. How do you approach both? And I'll add to that, what are the differences between poetry and prose?
So my poetry writing days are minimal. I was featured in an anthology during like my school age years. And then this book has a lot of lyrics in it. So my poetry has shifted from my main storytelling to sort of something supplementary. There are very many academic differences. So structure, the way you tell a story, moments in time versus experiences over a lifetime, that sort of thing. For me, it's a matter of I don't know why, but I have really strict poetic rules. Like it's got a rhyme at the end, and it's like these iambic pentameter. I was a really big Shakespeare nerd, so I get offended if songs on the radio don't follow like an adherence to like poetic tempo. Like I don't know why that's a thing. So I can't actually write poetry, I think, for a living, but I love the way you can take something, a feeling, an emotion, a moment, an experience, a person, and abstract it to a point that makes it sort of universally recognizable, but also mysterious. And so I funnel that into my prose by, I think, getting really colorful with certain descriptions. Even if you're talking about vomit smells being like a fog in your general area, I feel like that's an essence of poetry, not used very conventionally. But then, like I said, most of my there's music in a lot of what I write, so that's where it comes out most.
Awesome. Well, as someone who got very upset as a child when poems didn't rhyme, I feel you. Alrighty. We have another question. How do you choose the locations for your books? Sam, how do you choose locations?
Well, for the trilogy, I got to make up the locations since it is set in a fantasy world. And I just got to have a lot of fun with creating the kingdom. I have a map actually that I drew along with one of the awesome people at BSB, and got to sort of create this whole realm and this place, and learned a lot about geography and where things should and shouldn't be on a map. Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and that was kind of the fun thing I like about fantasy, is that I get to kind of make up my own rules with the place and how things work. So that's how it went for the trilogy. For Rocks and Stars, it's based in Texas, which is where I'm from. So just kind of pulled from what I knew.
Awesome. I love that. And I will admit to having made up a location for my book because I was too lazy to research an actual place. Anybody else cop to that? Thank you, Georgia.
That's why I do it. Too lazy to research.
Yep, I'm there. How do you choose locations, Georgia?
It's interesting because I started out with way back. They're almost always in upstate New York. I mean, I've set some books in other places. I did some Philly, I did some Chicago, but I always end up coming back here because this is where I live and I know it well. But one of my early editors used to call my city not Rochester because it kind of is. And what I discovered is I created this town, and it was really easy to set every book there because I remembered where things were and so they would go to like the same clubs or the same restaurants. And I kind of like that, like from book to book, I feel like my readers can come along and be like, oh yeah, I remember that restaurant. We were there 2 books ago, right? This is like same thing with the pizzeria. You know, when people read the pizzeria in this book and then they go on to the next series, they'll remember the pizzeria, I'm thinking. So it went from being lazy to working out really well. So I don't know. I mean, I'm sure at some point I'll set something somewhere else, but now it's hard because I know this place so well that I don't have to create it. I've already done it. It's already there. So I could just keep putting new characters in there. The lesbian population is really high in Northwood, New York, but
say that like, oh, we're all gonna move there because is high. Jane, how about you? How do you choose the location?
For The Queen Has a Cold, it begins in Boston, and I am a Midwesterner, but a city Midwesterner. So my last book was Chicago. And one of the characters, Sam, is a Midwesterner, and I wanted her to be a fish out of water. So I knew that the city couldn't be Chicago or Milwaukee or any other sort of Midwestern city. It needed to be somewhere where she would feel strange. And so that was the coast. And I put it on Boston on the East Coast just because I knew they were going to get on a plane at some point. And logistically, because of the spreadsheets and the data and the color coding, the plane ride could only be 6 hours long. And so they had to be on the East Coast in order to get to Geneva in time to then drive 2 hours to my fictional country, which I picked by meticulously searching Google Maps. And I marked off this small, like 9 square kilometers between France and Switzerland, where there's a slight stick out where France sticks into Switzerland slightly. And so I imagined like, we'll just put a national boundary there. And that tiny little stick out part would then become my fictional country. And I picked—
Brilliant.
Yeah, like it totally works. And so all of the distances all make sense because it's rooted in Google Maps. And I picked France because I feel like lots of royal romances sort of pattern themselves after Britain. even if they're not set in the UK. But my studies were all in French, and I lived in France for a couple of years. And so I wanted to like shake it up by having something sort of French inspired. So.
Okay, so this is how a plotter who has a spreadsheet makes up a fictional country. Unlike Georgia and I,
We are so lazy. We are so lazy. Jane makes us look awful.
Geo coordinates.
That is great. I love it. Sander, how about you? How do you choose location?
Oh, so this story is set in Georgia. I tend to go off of a place I've been, but not a place maybe that I love, because I don't want to write like a travel review for like my favorite places, right? So if I said it in my home state of Denver, you'd only read about Denver. Denver's a city. I picked Georgia because I wanted something that felt like it would make a semi-professional rock star really uncomfortable, which is Orion. So I needed him to be out of his comfort zone. But then also something that had romantic features. So there's orchards and there's beautiful forests and there's big porches, which is, I don't know, something I romanticize for some reason. So Georgia made the most sense. The city Painted Waters, where it's set, is not a real place, but it's based off of a city that I drove through once in southern Georgia. That's it looks about right. So I picked a fake city name based off of a city I've been to in a state that I don't wholly care for.
I like it. That's a good answer. And that is the Panster way of doing your location for your book. I love it. Unfortunately, we are out of time. So sad. Thank you to all our amazing panelists, Georgia Beers, Sam Ledel, Santiago, and Jane Kolven. Thank you so much for everyone for being here, and we will see you again next month. Have a great night.